All right, I think we're live. Welcome again to another live broadcast. I know on this end, it's been pretty quiet on this end, as you know, as always. Like I'm sure many of you have been quite busy on this end. But welcome. Today is July the 18th, 2026. And it's in the last few days here in the beautiful state of Arizona. We've been kind of on the cool side because we're in monsoon season, which means that we're actually getting some rain, much needed rain out here. And that's cooled things down a bit, but it's also brought plenty of mosquitoes too. But nonetheless, it's been quite a relief, man. I'm telling you, when you live in the desert and you get rain, oh my goodness. I'm like, baby, just keep the windows down. I don't care what gets wet because it's just so pleasant. And we're looking at 92 degrees. I'm telling you now, this is coming off of, and this summer, all in all, so far, has been pretty mild. I mean, we're usually up 113, 118 or whatever, but it's been quite lovely. Now, and it's funny because I come across some people who are complaining about the humidity, and I'm like, yeah, as someone who lived a few years in South Florida, yeah, this ain't nothing. This is a crisp day in Vermont somewhere. I'm telling you, it's not the same. But yeah, it's been wonderful. So I hope you guys have had a great week. I hope you got what you need to get accomplished. If you didn't, well, we still got time. So anyway, so today's broadcast, we're going to get into, we're asking the question, do you live in a noisy culture? Now, we're not just going to be, we're going to be talking about Black culture, of course, but it's all cultures in general, especially in this day and time right now, is skewing heavily towards the noisy side, right? But I want to talk about us as individuals. And, this is something that we've been on for some time, in talking about the importance of creating our own culture, right? And so that's what we're going to get into. We're going to always, as always, get into a little history, some things that you probably didn't notice, but it's happened right before your eyes. We're going to talk about certain instruments and what they do and the purpose of marketers always using these particular instruments. And, I'll also be getting into the impact that it's been having because I've actually been doing some tests on me, on yours truly, and I'm going to give you some of the results on that. But in the meantime, let's give people about, let's give people about, let's say about a minute or two to join us today. All right. So in the meantime, let's set the tone and let's get some quiet music playing. Okay. And then we're going to get right into it. Okay. All right, about another 30 seconds here. All righty. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me kind of turn that down a little bit. But as we're getting started here, so a couple of quick announcements here that we're going to jump right into it, okay? Let's see if I can find the first thing here. And don't worry, we'll be playing more of that a little bit later. Let's go ahead and get this up here. All right. And as always, our broadcasts are brought to you by Samba Tree. All right, where we have just introduced and just dropped what we call the breath brush. The breath brush. This is something better than mints, you guys. Better than those sugary mints that you get from the store that mess up your teeth. You know, the ones that they say 4 out of 5 dentists recommend. Of course they recommend it because there's so much sugar in there. They're going to make sure that it's designed to get you into their offices. So that's why they always say 4 out of 5 dentists recommend their stuff. But we're not interested in getting you in the dentist, for something that you can you can prevent. We're interested in you doing some preventive care, but at the same time, getting that funk out of your mouth. Well, this is a great tool to do that. And this is something we developed. It's full of botanical ingredients. We also put colloidal silver in there as well. And it's a well-rounded thing. Just go to our website, sambatree.com, and you will see all the ingredients in there. Like I said, again, 100% natural. And this is something that what you do is you brush your tongue. You just whip it out. It's very tiny. If I had it on me, I could show you. It's very tiny. It's just something that you could just, you basically pull it out, get your tongue. If you want to hit your teeth, you could do that real quick. And, and just tuck it in your shirt, tuck it in your purse, and that's it. And then boom, your breath is fresh again. But at the same time, it's healthy. And that's what we're about. And so this is something that, like I said, that my wife really is the one that really put in the work to develop this. And there's all kinds of options. You could just get one, but a lot of people have been getting the pack. So again, make sure you check us out over on sambatree.com. Sambatree.com for that. And the other thing on Samba Tree is we have a tea sale that's going on right now that will be ending. All right. This tea sale is about to end. Save 20% now. The code is right there on the screen. So if you go to sambatree.com, if you're interested in any kind of our herbal teas, well, there you go. 20% off. But we don't just have teas. We got all kinds of stuff. Now, the teas are 20% off, but we got coffees. We have cream. Do we have cream? No, I don't think we took those off. We have powders. We have oil. We might have oils too, but check it out. Just go to sambatree.com, and we're all about addressing our health from a very natural perspective, a natural way, a healthy way. And that's what we're all about. Check us out again at the website, sambatree.com. All right. So again, thank you so much. And thank you for all of those who have joined us today as we get into this discussion. As always, big shout out to all of our beautiful people that follow us. Every time we hit that live button, we are so grateful for each and every one of you guys. Thank you so much and really appreciate you guys. Let's get into it, shall we? Now, of course, the answer is, do we live in a noisy culture? Yes, we do. Now, when I say that, again, I'm speaking on a very wide perspective. In other words, if you look at all cultures out there today, as I said earlier, there is a skewing, if you will, where all of them are getting noisier, and noisier. And all of them are doing that. Now, because on this platform, we tend to focus on Black culture, we're not saying that Black culture is the worst. We're not saying that, okay? We're just talking in-house, okay? So I got to set the table first before people start, going off on whatever. So that's why we're talking about that, okay? Now, when we look at black culture, is it noisy? Well, unfortunately, it is. But is noise all bad? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, it isn't. But I do want to point out some things from our history, and we'll get into that in a moment. But let me just give you just a quick kind of like, I'll tell you about the experiment, if you will, that unintentionally that I have been conducting on myself. And it was, I was recently telling you guys, when you're going through this deconstruction thing, it's not simply you are just one day wake up and say, okay, boom, I'm not going to follow in that path anymore. And I'm talking like Christianity or Hebrew stuff or whatever. It's not that. It's a very gradual step. It's very gradual, right? Getting to that point and also departing. It's very gradual because this is something that for many of us, we committed our entire lives to. You know what I mean? And for many of us, I'm talking going back to childhood. So you can't expect someone just to one day just snap a finger and be like, okay, I don't believe that anymore. It doesn't work that way. So I found myself going through these different phases. Some days are very good and I'm doing fine. Other days I start thinking about certain things and I find myself getting angry. I start thinking about a lot of stuff. And then in the meantime, life does still go on and other things come in to interfere and to cause challenges and stuff like that. So I have to be honest with you. I've been more on the angry side lately. I may not look like it right now, but yeah, I've been really there. You know what I mean? So when I'm home, I just, I'm not lashing out on anybody. It's not like that. But it has definitely impacted me, right? And so, I think it was the last time we were together. I talked to you guys about a channel. Let me take care of this here real quick. Hold on for a sec. I love the sunlight. But it's casting kind of like a spotlight on one side of my face there. So anyway, I talked about a local radio station that I came across that I thought was awesome because they play, it's a public radio station and it's one that's geared towards black listeners, particularly old school black listeners, also Hispanics, Native Americans, and it's a public access channel, and I like it for many reasons, right? And they've also, one of the main reasons is that they say over and over again, they've made a commitment. They said, we're not going to play any music that's going to be derogatory towards women or any other individual at all. We want to keep things positive on this channel. I've never heard of this channel before, but I was like, wow, I really like that commitment. And so, they play, and it's very like on a whim. Like they may say, all right, I'm just going to play this one song, right? They end up playing like 3 songs from the same album. Like they'll just do whatever. And it's just like really cool like that. And so I was listening to it and just really enjoying it, right? But I was still dealing with my stuff. I was just still while listening to that. And, they have their little ads and stuff, but not too many, right? And it's fine, whatever. You're going to have to, there's cost and you're going to need ads, right? But then I came across another channel because I was just surfing through the channel now, especially if you live out here in the West. Man, most of the radio stations are going to be in Spanish, which I try to listen to from time to time to brush up on my Spanish, right? But I don't necessarily, it ain't on top of my list. I'm going to keep it real with you. Then I came across classical music, which I really do love, right? And so I was like, oh, this is really quite calming. And so I started I just had it playing, just have it playing in the background. And I'm just listening to it. And when I listen to classical music, I notice something my brain does. I begin to start exploring and imagining different things, right? And this is all connected. We're not just chatting here. This is chat with a purpose. Okay. So this is all leading somewhere because this is going to be a recurring thing. So I notice my mind just every now and then will just begin to explore a little bit and all of that. But I also noticed something else. I noticed that, how there's the saying that says music that soothes the savage beast. Well, I actually began to experience that. I noticed that I started getting a lot calmer. And yeah, I do use some language in the car, that's really not savory, because I'm like, it's got to get out somewhere, and so I noticed that as I was listening to this, all of a sudden my language got much better. It wasn't even, I didn't even notice it until one day I'm driving. I was like, wow, I actually feel good. And not only that, as you get older, you start noticing things about your body, about your mind, and all of that, right? And one of the things that was kind of like, and then when something happens, of course, your mind just goes there and plays it all the way out, like, oh my God, is this going to happen to me? That kind of thing, right? But I noticed that, from time to time, my short-term memory, I'll just be thinking about something and literally a second later, I'll forget it. Now, this doesn't happen all the time. It just maybe once every other day or something like that, right? But then I realized that part of that was I wasn't getting enough sleep. That was one, because I'm always working, right? That's one. But the other thing was, it was just stress and other stuff, right? But I noticed when I started listening to this, I didn't have that problem. It wasn't even an issue. I was like, wow, I'm started to remember a lot of other things. And again, just to be clear, and I know for my loved ones that, the ones that are close to me, I'm not losing my memory. Nothing to be afraid of. It's not like that. We all kind of like every now and then you begin to forget things every now and then. You know what I mean? But as you get older, sometimes you begin to magnify those things and then you start wondering like, oh my God, am I going to, it's like that. So I'm openly talking this out, and telling you, wow, I did this. And I noticed that there was a real change in that. You know what I mean? So, but I noticed that as well, right? When I was listening to this classical music. And so that's what we're going to. So we're not necessarily just going to be talking about classical music, but we're going to do more of a breakdown here on that. Okay, that's where we're going to go. So let's kind of go to a place where I think all of us can relate to, especially if you're in my age bracket. Do you guys remember going into the department store with your parents? And let me see if I can, because I didn't. Oh, I did bookmark it. Hold on. I just pulled up the wrong playlist here. Do you guys remember going into the department store with your mom or with your parents or whatever, and you're listening, in the background, you hear this? It's in the background. You don't really notice it, right? Well, back then, just again, we're in the time machine, we're going backwards. And so this will be playing in the back, like in the far background. You weren't really focused on it. You just kind of hear it playing in the background, right? And there's a reason why they used to play this kind of music. Um, what they noticed is when they would play this kind of music, what do you notice about this music? I'm playing it because I know I'm running my mouth, but there's of course a lot of things that we notice. But what instruments are more the prominent ones? The piano, which is a stringed instrument, the violins, the other instruments, stringed instruments. That sounds like perhaps a French horn. Very muted. Right? Now, is there rhythm in it? Yes. You can hear the drum in there, but it's very muted. Right? Well, this is how the atmosphere was when you would go into a department store. And what they noticed is when they would play that kind of music, they noticed that people would tend to stay in the store a lot longer. And not only did they stay in the store a lot longer, but what they noticed was that people would take more time to really envision these products, whatever it was they were looking at. And if we're talking about clothes, like suits, ties, jackets, dresses, shoes, whatever. And there was a lot more engagement with the salespeople. You know, you go into there and the salespeople, again, for those of us who are older, I'm sure you remember this. How salespeople, you remember back then where salespeople were very knowledgeable? Like people actually took pride in being a salesperson in a department store. And one of their responsibilities was to be very knowledgeable about the product. And they would tell you about, oh yeah, this such and such shoe it was made here and it does this or that or whatever, or the shirt or the jacket or whatever. Now, if you want a good suit, you're going to want this because of this. Now, I'm not saying you don't have that now, but back then that was pretty standard. Okay. Now, those are department stores. Also, I know many of you remember some department stores, when you go into the higher end ones, they used to have piano player, like a real person playing at like a baby grand playing the piano. Yeah, they used to do that. And, I know in Philadelphia, for example, there was a store called John Wanamaker's. They were so dedicated to live music. They even would have there was one section where it was literally built within the building. It was an organ. And they would have someone playing this real grand, like cathedral type organ. And you would hear this playing while people are shopping. But again, the attitude, the atmosphere it created was one that obviously, like someone just said, was calming, right? But the shopper, the consumer that was coming in there, of course, they were driving sales. And the results that they saw was they were getting sales because people, and it was translating to sales because people were taking more time to process and to think about these products. And I wonder how this would look on me. I wonder how this, but it was allowing your mind to kind of just go and explore, right? Now, fast forward, if we go into the stores today, well, what do you notice? Well, they don't play that kind of music anymore, do they? Well, now they play music that's more centered around the drum, right? Not just that, but they play like top 40 music sometimes, and I say sometimes because they're not playing, they're not, I don't think they're playing, what's her name? Sexy Red. I mean, I don't know what store you're going into on that, but when I say top 40, I would say top 40 from like 20, 30 years ago. Okay, let's do that. They'll play that kind of music, right? They'll do that kind of stuff, but it's more upbeat and you actually hear people singing and all that kind of stuff. Well, what they notice is when they play that kind of music, what it does is it drives people into going into different departments, right? So whereas when they were just playing the more instrumental stuff, people were just taking their time, and the salespeople had to spend a lot more time with those customers, right? Because people were just very relaxed and calm. Well, that's not good enough. So they had to upbeat the music. And then what happened is now people are more like in tune and they're like, okay, all right, so we're done here. Let's go over there. Let's go over there. Let's go over here. Right. And so that's why they began to introduce the music that you hear today in many of these department stores, and you go into Walmart, your grocery store, or whatever. That's what's happening today. All right. And so that first music that you just heard, that was referred to as background music, or background music. Then you had it was a middle ground, which is what they will refer to as muzak or elevator music, right? I know some of you guys have heard of that, right? Music that you would typically hear like in an elevator. It's not distracting. It's designed to complement the architecture of the space within the building, right? That's what it's designed to do. The music that's played in these stores today is designed to drive the individual into making more purchases, okay? And the center of that, and that's referred to as foreground music, okay? Now, the centerpiece of this music, and I kind of just mentioned that to you, is one instrument that stands out, and that is the drum. Now, this is where we're going to get into black music. We're going to talk about that, okay? Now, when we look at African music, all right, music coming out of the continent of Africa. Now, we're not, for the sake of time, we're not going to do a more detailed breakdown on music from different regions of Africa. We've done that before, but for this conversation, we're going to keep it kind of light and we're going to keep it kind of general here, okay? Now, when we think of African music or African music, the one instrument that stands out above all instruments is the drum, all right? Africa is known for the drum. Now, the drum was used for many things on the continent, throughout the continent of Africa. Obviously, it was used for entertainment purposes, but it was also used to communicate things, right? It was also used for religious purposes. It was used for numbers of things. I mean, we even talked about how the drum was also used there was mathematics, that was tied into the rhythms and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very complex instrument. It's not just simply beating on something and that's it. What way, they would like to depict on in Hollywood. But it's a very complex when you really take the time to study the drum from an African perspective. You'll find that it's actually a very complex instrument and is one that I think a lot of people will have a greater respect for if they took the time to study it, right? But anyway, but what is the biggest characteristic of the drum? Well, the biggest characteristic of the drum is that it calls attention. That's what it does. It brings attention. That's when you hear the drum, it's like, okay, hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. Just want you to know, I am here. All right. That's what the drum does. So when you hear the drum, it's always there, very vocal, if you will, and letting all the instruments know, hey, I'm here. And the same thing for the listener. It's to keep the listener driven, to drive along with whatever that music is. So, be it Earth, Wind, and Fire or whatever, they are trying to drive you to something very specific, be it their message or whatever it is. The drum is the centerpiece that helps them to drive that message home. They're calling you to a very specific thing. You understand what I'm saying? So any style of music, it doesn't have to be just necessarily African-based music, any drum-centered music, the drum is used to bring attention. It's to drive the individual. So you're probably, or now, hopefully by now, you're seeing the connection between what I just said just now and what I was talking about a moment ago in the department store. In the department store, once they begin to start putting that more popular music in there, it was driving the customer to specific things, right? To specific, it was okay, you're here. Okay, we're glad you're here and all that, but we want you to keep going into the store. We want you to make more make more purchases, right? And so that's what the drum brought that element in here, okay? And it's driving you to move forward, okay? And so marketers have been knowing this by blending in that music with trying to get people to make purchases. Okay. And so so that is what the drum brings. Let's see. We can also, okay, so here's the point I want to bring out. Now let's contrast that for just a moment, because I'm going to play some other, I'm gonna introduce you some other things too as well, and just in a moment. This video is not going to be long, by the way. Now, when we contrast that with classical music, and when I say classical music, let me just hit the brakes here for a second. Do not take away from this conversation that I am somehow elevating Eurocentric classical music above African music. That is not what I'm doing at all. Okay. But what we're going to look at are that and I'm going to show you or remind you that African based music also offers these same things. It's just that, unfortunately, this system that we're in has attenuated that part of it. Well, we're going to bring it right back into this conversation, okay? So we're not in any way, shape, or form saying that Eurocentric music is the way to go, that African music you need to leave alone. That is not what I'm saying at all, okay? Nor am I saying the drums are evil, bad, or wicked, okay? Nobody's saying that, okay? So I just wanted to take that pause and make sure that we're all on the same page with that, okay? All right, so I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so when we talk about classical music, now again, I'm going to use this in a very broad sense because in a moment I'm going to bring in some other music here. Classical music, it provides an emotional landscape where you're free to explore. Now, what do I mean by that? It's kind of like this. When you listen to classical music, when I listen to classical music, how about we start with that, okay? When I'm listening to classical music, it's almost as if my mind begins to wander a bit. Like I begin to think about other things. It's like my mind is kind of like I'm imagining things, like maybe I'm running through the forest, or maybe I'm climbing up a mountain, or maybe I'm on a great hunt or something like that. I notice that my mind begins to explore and wander a little bit, right? Now, if I'm listening to R&B or any drum center, even jazz music, as comforting as it can be, I still am somewhat driven more by the composer, the singer, I'm to something more specific on that landscape. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so it's it can be a little more constrictive versus, when you listen to classical music, the landscape seems to be a lot wider. Okay. And so I've looked into this, and they've actually done some studies on this too. And this is one of the reasons why they used to, this was in the 90s, they was encouraging, parents to play, they called it the Mozart effect. Now there's a big debate on how effective that playing Mozart music was, to children and all of that. So that discussion is always going to continue to go on. But I think it is worth saying that, during those days, it was not uncommon to have 13-year-olds, 10-year-olds writing full symphony compositions. How about I say that? Where they're writing all these multiple parts for different instruments, and you 10 years old playing for kings and queens and stuff like that. Well, we really don't see that today, do we? So, and then as far as the amount of people that were geniuses during that day, well, it was a lot more back then than we have today, isn't it? See, the music that we listen to today, you're driven to something specific where it's like you hear it. This is my message, and this is what I want to tell you, something very specific. And I tell you that, but then you forget about it, right? Look at all the hundreds and hundreds of videos that we have produced on this channel. I'm sure many of you have forgotten probably most of them, right? Because there's something about something very specific, right? But when we think about, when we talk about classical music, imagine writing music where hundreds of years later, people are still playing your music. There are songs that have come out a month ago, 2 months ago, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, where people don't really remember them as much. You understand? And because again, what that music does, it drives you to something specific. What it also does, it's evoking certain emotions and stuff to come out, but you're following along something very specific and you're being driven to something specific. How deep does it cut into your emotion, into your soul and all of that? It doesn't really give time for that. Okay. Not all the time. You know what I mean? You may be out here dancing and moving and all that kind of stuff, but does it allow your mind to really explore and to think and to wonder? That's something I want you to think about it. So, but anyway, again, we're not saying one is worse than the other. We're not saying it, because I think all music has a specific purpose. I remember some time ago, and now we talk about noisy, people who have a noisy life, for example. Let's touch on that for a moment. When you are someone that surrounds yourself with noise, now we're talking about music now, but noise can come in many different forms. Obviously we're talking about music now, but also in the people, obviously the people that you hang around with, right? You hang around people who are always noisy. When you're on social media all the time, you see people who are always mad at something, always yelling at something. They found something to get mad at. If you've been following this platform, we've been kind of tracking from a distance, the Nolan issue, and then before that, it was Carmelo Anthony. And then it's like you just go from one thing to the next and to the next and to the next and to the next. You're never settled. It's always noise. You're always being driven to the next thing. There's no rest in it. It was something that came back to my mind when I was listening to this classical music. I said, we have this saying where we say, rest in peace. You know how we say rest in peace? And typically that's associated with what? Death. Why does resting in peace have to be associated with someone dying? You ever thought of that? Why can't we rest in peace? Why can't tonight you can rest in peace? Why can't your day be filled with resting in peace? Why does that only have to be associated with death? All right, RIP. We should be resting in peace, RIPing every moment of the day. Resting in peace. That shouldn't be something just associated with death. You understand what I'm saying? But the system that we're in is driving us to work, drive to the next issue, get mad at something else, get mad at something else. That's what this system is doing. And so anyway, let's take a quick, give you another example of, let's talk about in the black church, for example. Now in the black church, let's take a look at the music, for example. You got different extremes here. When you listen to music in the church, right, you got two extremes. First is very celebratory. I know things are coming back to my memory of things I wanted to share with this whole talk that we're doing right now. But I looked up the definition between joy and peace. And see, when I hear the words joy and peace, my brain just automatically just merge that together and put that under one category as good, joy and peace. Those are two things. Those are two things, but they mean the same thing. So I'm gonna put those on the same shelf. Well, you shouldn't do that, because joy, it basically connects to expression. That's what joy is. It's usually connected to some type of expression, a physical expression that you're manifesting. Joy. You're joyful. You're happy. Your face is lit up, right? You may be dancing. You may be shaking and all that kind of stuff, right? That's joy. Now, peace is associated with what? Calm. Now, when you're walking through the woods, now, sometimes these things can merge, can cross a little bit, joy and peace. They can merge from time to time. But for the most part, you got to understand that these things have distinctive meanings. And that's what we're doing. And as I'm going to talk about this Black church music in a moment, peace is something that for example, when you're walking in the forest, that's peace, right? You don't see the trees out there like, yeah, yeah, hallelujah, hey, glory. You don't see trees doing that. When I'm walking in the forest, it's very calm. It's peaceful. Most of the times I don't hear a thing other than the airplanes flying over. But other than that, you'll hear the wind. Even the animals are very quiet, except the birds, maybe some of the other animals. But for the most part, it's like nature has agreed to keep the volume at a certain level. And when you're walking through the forest, it's very calm. There isn't there's activity going on, right? But it's, for the most part, it's calm. It's where people can go to do what? To relax. And when you're walking through the forest, what begins to happen? Your mind starts wandering. It starts exploring a little bit. You start thinking about other things, right? When you're in the forest, you're just kind of like, I never thought of that. I never thought of that. Now, if you put those AirPods in your ear, now you listening to, do you remember? You know what I mean? You're being driven by the person who's singing. It's not complimenting the piece. It's not complimenting. I am not saying that music is bad. We're not saying that. But what I'm saying is these things have different meanings, right? And so now when we get into when we're talking about Black church music, for example, when we talk about Black church music, you got different extremes. One, you got the type of music when we talk about worship music, right? What are you doing in worship music? Well, of course, it's all Black church music is going to be centered around the drum. So it's going to be a lot of rhythm and all of that, right? But it's also centered on how unworthy you are. All right. Now, this bridges off into another conversation that we can have in another video, but it's centered on how unworthy you are. And if it wasn't for his sacrifice, I wouldn't be nothing. I am nothing without you. I am absolutely nothing. I am dirt. I am nothing. I'm trash. But if it wasn't for the blood of Jesus, if it wasn't for me being covered by the blood of Jesus, I would be, if it wasn't for his blood, if it wasn't for him sending his only son, I would be nothing. I would be going to hell. Oh, God. Does that sound peaceful to you? That's not peaceful. After you done cried your eyes out and emoted so much, after that, after you done cried out, then you're going to have some peace. It's like after you done cried so much, back in the day, you have to get that beating, and you're like, you get them little hiccups. It's like that. After you done cried your eyes out, now all of a sudden there's really nothing left because you spent. That's not really peace, is it? Then you got the other extreme where with the praise music, where it's just like, Hey, dance like David. Hey, 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 And so you got those two extremes. But that centerpiece where you're not necessarily being driven by anything, but you're just allowed to just exist. Well, see, in the church world, you have to be driven. What do you have to be driven to? You have to be driven to give in the tithes and offerings. You have to be driven to whatever the overall messaging is of that pastor or whoever's preaching. Church is always about driving you. You understand what I'm saying? So the music is going to reflect that. You understand what I'm saying? It's always driving you. And we could see that within, and like I said, for this conversation, we're talking, Black culture. You could definitely see this within Black church music. You could definitely see that. Okay. But this middle space here of just peace and calm, where does that fit within our culture? Now, let's go back now. When we look at different cultures, when we look at, like, when we talk about European culture, when we look at their music, well, there's a whole span of it, right? Of course, they got classical music. They also have other music too. Like when I say dance music, I'm talking now I'm going like more ancient times, right? They would have their little jig music that they would, they had their own spread, right? So they had that, right? In their religious space, your monks and all of that, they had their chanting. So that was a whole genre in of itself. So, they had that where there's a genre within their culture where it was dedicated to peaceful music, calm, not driven by a drum or anything like that. Okay. Now I got to keep reminding you, we are not saying that the drum is evil. Okay. We're not saying that. Okay. We're not saying that. Okay. Just follow me. Okay. When we look at Asian culture, now when we talk about Asian culture, that's a whole, man, we're not just talking China or Japan and all that. That's India, any of the Asian countries. When you look at their culture, built within their culture, they have segments of their culture where it is dedicated to peace, to calm, to quiet, that kind of thing, right? Where even in some, I want to say Chinese, and someone could correct me if it's called feng shui. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Where literally they make sure that the house that they're living in, people who practice that kind of stuff, that the front door and the back door of the house are perfectly aligned, because in their spirituality, they believe that, hey, if whatever bad spirit is going to come in, we want to make sure that spirit has a direct way to leave in the back door. So they believe in creating an environment, a space of peace and of calm, right? Now, when we look at Black culture, my question to you is this: what part of Black culture can we honestly say is dedicated to peace, to calm, to quiet? That's something I want you to think about. Now, again, someone may say, well, we got Quiet Storm. We got smooth jazz. Again, that drum is still driving that song. Now, can it be calming? Yes, absolutely. Jazz can be very calming. Now, again, we are not dissing jazz. Jazz in of itself, we could do videos on that, just how brilliant it is, because jazz is a combination of, let's say, you got R&B in that, but also classical. So jazz ain't a bad thing at all. What we're saying is there's some space there that we need to explore a little bit more. That's what we're getting at. All of these places, all these different genres, they have their places for a reason, and these aren't bad places. What we're doing in this conversation is saying, hey, there's another space here that I think is underdeveloped. So let's talk about that. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So jazz music, I mean, when you talk about science and mathematics and all of that stuff in there, it's brilliant music, right? But there's still somewhat being driven when you're listening to even jazz music, right? So it does have some calming elements to it. But does it really, when you compare it to, let's say, classical music, does it really bring a sense of peace when you compare it to that? No, not really. And so what I want you to do is what we're going to do now is I want you to, when we think about African culture, of course, unfortunately, one of the things that's happened, as we all know, is that when Europeans came throughout Africa, they burnt down things, they destroyed all kinds of stuff. The culture is just, unfortunately, some very important artifacts and things were taken from us. They were removed and all of that. So some things we'll never get back. But the one thing that has been driven to us over and over again when it comes to African culture, particularly in the music part, is that, well, it's always the drums for them. And we've seen this reinforced in movies and cartoons. Anytime we think of African music, it's always someone on a drum, right? And we've talked about that too, how the drum was used, as instruments of war to to call attention and all this other stuff. We've talked about that. I just touched on that, but we're not getting into that today. But African music isn't just the drum. So what I want to do is I have a couple of videos here that, and I'm doing this for the benefit of some people who may not know this. Believe it or not, there's some people who don't know. And so that's why I want to make sure that we understand. We've talked about these things before, but we're just talking about it in a different setting here. So you guys remember, for those of you who've been following us for a long minute, you remember I was trying to learn the kalimba. Well, the kalimba is also known as a thumb piano. Well, the kalimba is an African instrument. It's a very beautiful instrument. But let me bring the kalimba on the screen here. Give me just a moment. There we go. Let's play a little bit of this video here. We're just going to take it in. Uh-oh. Now, in this one, he's singing, but just imagine hearing the kalimba by itself. These are what I'm showing you. And like I said, again, I know this isn't anything new, particularly for my audience. We know about the kalimba. Okay. This isn't brand new, and I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I am doing is I'm bringing it back up, because think about modern music today. How often do you hear the kalimba? You don't. Not really. Well, here's another instrument as well. And this is, there's different names for this instrument too. It's one of the names is the kora. The kora. Let's get that up here. And this one, the musician is not singing. So let's take a listen to this one. Anyway, I think that's just so beautiful. And I'm showing this again, like I said again, these instruments, I'm sure that for particularly in my audience, these aren't new. It isn't anything new. I mean, a lot of people who are have some, musically inclined to some degree, you should be familiar with some of these instruments. Someone had mentioned like Earth, Wind, and Fire. They used to play it. Yeah, they used to do that, right? But when you think about musicians today, not really. You don't see these types of instruments being played. I'm talking to like the top ones, like in hip hop or R&B. You don't see that, do you? Everything's electronic. Everything's keyboard, and now we have AI doing all of that. But we don't really see that. Do you remember some of you guys who are older, my age, maybe a little bit older? You may have had certain family members who used to the culture. Now we're talking just culture in general, particularly here in the United States, where I would say middle class on up families used to have a room that was dedicated, that where the centerpiece of the room wasn't the TV. You know what the centerpiece of the room was? It was the piano. Yeah, like the it wasn't, and I ain't talking about a grand piano. I'm talking about like the regular one, the standard one that kind of leans against the wall. Yeah, there were a lot of homes back in the day where the centerpiece of that particular room, they would refer to it as the parlor room, where it was the piano. Now, what made that interesting was that how the piano, it involved multiple things. In other words, someone had to physically be involved in producing the music. Not only that, you heard them making mistakes and correcting, right? The person who's playing, it's not just the hearing part, but it's also the coordination between their prefrontal, their cortex and other parts of their brain, and the left and the right hand coordination. So there was a lot of involvement just for the player. Now, for the listener all throughout the house, that's where the music was coming from. It wasn't necessarily coming from, turn that up, what do you call it? Siri, play this music. No. It wasn't like that. No. Everybody was involved in the production of music in that house. And it may have been on a small scale, but nonetheless, it was a source of entertainment in those days. Now you could buy those. I've gone to Goodwill, man. It's people, you can buy those pianos for literally for a song, pun intended. But we had a culture back then where that's how it was. And even I think about my own grandparents' house, they had a room where it was a piano in it. My aunt used to play, well, both of my aunts used to play. They still play a little bit on the piano. And now, like the last time I went to my aunt's house, she has a piano in her room, in her house. And it was a little bit off tune or whatever, hadn't been tuned probably in ages, but she could still play it. So the involved music was a part of what we did. And it wasn't just music. It was the kind of music that allowed your mind to grow and to explore. Right. And so that's really what I wanted to bring up and talk about, is when we talk about a noisy culture, we very much live in a very noisy culture. So be it on social media, going into the grocery store, going to department stores, wearing those things. I was going to play a video on that, but I'll just basically tell you, like those ear pods. Now that's up to you if you want to wear that or not. But I've listened to scientists on both sides, some saying that they're very dangerous, others saying that not really, is not enough EMF to be, to interfere with the chemical composition of your brain and all of that. So I've heard both sides of it. But I will say this, as someone who's not licensed, in that medical field, but I will say this, that were you born with that constantly on your ear? No. So by default, you do have an elevated amount of EMF that is going to your brain, and it's still a work in progress. In other words, scientists are still trying to evaluate if these things have a long-term effect on your brain. And so what I would suggest to you is that if you're someone that's always wearing these things on your ear, don't do it. Is that call really that important for you to always have that thing playing in your ear or, connected to your ear? Probably not. I know we all like our music and all that, but try not wearing those sometimes. That would be my advice to you. And, like I touched on this earlier in our conversation here, but I talked about how people can be noisy, but noise can also be reflected in our food, the type of food that we eat. When you look at, like the latest craze with the pineapple, with the Kool-Aid in it and all that kind of stuff, it's a very noisy type of food, isn't it? Same thing with a lot of this other stuff, very noisy. It disturbs our body if we eat too much of it. Okay. So what I'm saying is that enjoy your R&B, enjoy your jazz music, but it's kind of like this. If I want to really sculpt and build my body, you don't just do push-ups all the time. That's great. But you also need to expand your exercises a little bit. Do some sit-ups, right? Do some stretches, do some other things too. You can continue to do your push-ups, but start doing these other things too. Well, same thing with the type of frequencies that we take in our bodies on a regular basis. If you're only accustomed to just music that's driving you all the time, well, you're always going to be that person that's always driven to the next thing. Like social media is built especially for you because it's easy. It can easily control you from one topic to the next topic, to the next topic, to the next topic, right? You've already been groomed because you're always on that, right? But when you unplug, when you say, you know what, let me switch it up a little bit. Let me kind of allow my mind to explore this landscape a little bit and just kind of relax. Let me practice calm. Let me not be driven by somebody for a change. Let me allow my mind and my nervous system to calm and relax. There are a lot of people who don't know how to do that. I was in a Walmart not too long ago, and there's a black woman that was working there. When I tell you this woman was so loud, I was like, are they going to have this conversation with her? Now, she wasn't like rude. It wasn't anything like that. She was just talking so loud. Everything she was saying, it was just so loud. Like the person she was talking to, they were like, yeah, because something. And she's like, yeah, because it was just like, I was like, okay, is she not take her meds or something? Because she's loud. But there's a lot of people out there who, when they get home, it's loud, right? When you get on social media, loud. Whatever it is, everything is loud, right? What I'm saying is do something that allow your mind to rest, allow your mind to practice peace and calm. And it's okay to be joyful because our culture loves and prides ourselves in expressing joy and dancing and shaking our behinds and all that kind of stuff. That all has its place. But what I will challenge us on is this. Do we have a place where we can practice peace, calm, and allowing our brain to explore and to grow and to develop on its own? That is my challenge to you. We live in a culture that always wants to drive us. And when you look at Black culture, we do reflect the drum in many ways. Because like I remember I said at the beginning of this conversation, the drum is always trying to call attention to itself, right? When you look at Black culture, what do? We're always trying to call attention to, hey, we did it first. We're the ones that came up with that first. And without us, shoot, there ain't gonna be nothing. There ain't no party until we get here. That's the drum. That's what the drum brings. Some of that is okay, but some of that, no. Let's add some balance to that. And that's what my encouragement to you is. So I hope you got something out of this conversation. And that's kind of where I've been, you guys. Of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the world and the news and all of that. But, it's Saturday. Let's talk about something else. And hopefully, this is something that would get you to think a little bit. My recommendation, if you're someone that haven't really touched classical music, or you get turned off by, that's what I was going to mention. People who have a noisy life, and they actually did a test on this. This was in several towns. I want to say Chicago was one, but it was other cities as well. And it's not coming to mind. One, I think for some reason, Philly is coming to mind. But you had Walgreens, and then it was like a CVS as well. What they were practicing, this was a few years ago. They had quite a few vagrants that were hanging out in front of the store. People who were just kind of like, you trying to go into the store and people hitting you up with money and trying to ask you for money and donations or whatever, right? And so the drugstores, they got tired of it because they said you're chasing our potential customers away. So what they did was they bought some speakers to place in front of the store, and guess what kind of music they were playing? Classical music. And don't you know, when they started playing classical music, it drove them away. Now, you had people who had issues with that and saying, I don't really like that, and that's wrong, and all this other stuff. But it does speak of something. When you are an individual who lives a very noisy life, the very thought of being put in a calm and peaceful environment, for some people, it comes as an offense. You can't handle that. You can't stay still. You got to be making some noise. You got to be fidgeting. You got to start something. You understand what I'm saying? That's when you live a very noisy life. It's stuff like this. It's almost as an offense to you. Because why? Your nervous system is constantly being reinforced with noise. It's always being driven. What I'm saying to you is add some balance to your nervous system. Add some calm. Add some peace. And you're going to start seeing some difference. You'll start seeing your memory begin to improve. The anger issues that you may have been dealing with, you're going to see that, it's really not that bad. That is what my encouragement to you is to start doing that kind of stuff and see what happens. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of that, and you can continue the conversation in the comments below. All right. Thank you to all for listening in this evening. You guys take care, and we'll be talking again soon.